In the summer of 1974, Clara Robichaux stood beside a field that looked less like farmland and more like a mistake the earth had tried to erase. The ground was cracked open in plates. The ditches were half collapsed. 3 shallow bowls sagged across the property, where rainwater collected just long enough to sour, rot, and disappear. Even the grass gave up in patches. The man selling it, Nolan Duhon, kept wiping sweat from his neck and glancing at her like he expected her to come to her senses. "You understand what you're buying?" he asked. Clara was 24. Newly divorced. Broke enough that everyone in the parish knew it before she did. Her husband had kept the cane acreage, the tractor, the shed, and the good house with the deep porch. She had left with 2 suitcases, a biscuit tin full of receipts, and a wooden box of notebooks written by her grandfather. Nolan pointed across the field. Cotton failed here. Soybeans failed here. I tried pasture grass, and even that came up mean. This place holds water when you don't want it, and loses water when you need it. Then he said the sentence that was meant to save her. "Land like this doesn't make farmers, it buries them." Clara looked at the cracked basins. She looked at the faint water stains on the cypress trunks beyond the ditch. She looked at the low lip of clay running around the largest bowl like the rim of an old hand-thrown pot, and she saw something no one else saw. Not a dead field, a vessel. She signed the paper on the hood of Nolan's truck. No banker, no lawyer, no ceremony. Just one woman handing over nearly every dollar she had for 62 acres of land, everyone else considered a punishment. As Nolan drove away, his truck bounced hard over the ruts. Clara heard him laugh once through the open window. It was not a cruel laugh exactly. It was worse. It was the laugh of a man relieved to have escaped a bad bargain, and certain he had left the bad luck behind. By supper, half the parish knew. By Sunday, the whole parish had improved the story. At the feed counter, the men shook their heads over paper cups of coffee. At church, women lowered their voices when Clara walked past. At the co-op, her name became a kind of warning. Poor Clara. That girl lost the good place and bought the sour bowl. She'll be asking for help before the first frost. Nobody had to hate her to underestimate her. That was the heavy part. Most of them believed they were being practical. They had seen land like that before. Louisiana clay can be generous, but it can also be spiteful. When it drains badly, roots suffocate. When it dries, it locks up like fired brick. A farmer can spend a lifetime arguing with a field like that, and die with nothing but debt to show for it. They looked at Clara, and saw a woman with no equipment, no husband, no credit line, and no sense. They were right about almost everything. She had no equipment, she had no husband, she had no credit line, but she had sense of a different kind. Her grandfather, Clara Robichaux, had never farmed by conquering land. He farmed by reading it. Every child in the family knew he could stand in a ditch after a storm, push one boot into the mud, and tell you what that field would do 3 months later. He kept notebooks the way other men kept ledgers, not just yields and costs, but rainfall, frogs, wind direction, when the crawfish chimneys appeared, when rice birds arrived, which low spots held clean water and which held rot. When Clara was a girl, he made her walk fields slowly, not across them. Through them, never ask first what you want from a place, he told her once, while they stood ankle deep in warm ditch water. Ask what it is already trying to become. Most farmers, she knew, fought the water. They cut bigger drains. They burned stubble. They bought strong. They treated every surprise in the field like an insult. Her grandfather did not. He said a farm was a living arrangement, not a battlefield. And after the divorce, when Clara had no land and almost no money, those notebooks became the only inheritance anyone could not take from her. The night after she bought the Duhon tract, she laid them across the floor of her rented room. The screen window rattled in the heat. Moths tapped the bare bulb above her head. She turned page after page, until she found the entry she had half remembered. It was dated 1942, after a hard, dry season. Low basins crack today, her grandfather had written. Neighbors call them failures. They forget that a bowl is not useless because it is empty. An empty bowl is waiting. The question is whether the farmer is wise enough to feed it before it fills. Clara sat back on her heels. There it was, the land everyone mocked for holding water, was shaped to hold water. The basins were not defects, they were unfinished ponds. Their shallow lips were not useless ridges, they were almost levees. The same clay that punished cotton roots could seal a flooded rice field, and after rice, when other farmers saw stubble and waste, Clara saw feed. The plan was simple enough to sound foolish. In late spring, she would flood the lowest basin and plant rice. The rice would grow through the summer in shallow water. After harvest, she would not burn the stubble. She would not plow it under immediately. She would flood the field again, and let the cut stalks soften and decay. That decaying stubble would feed crawfish through the cool months. The crawfish would feed on what the rice left behind. Their burrowing would loosen the soil. Their waste would help return fertility to the field. Then, the next season, the rice would grow in land that had been worked from beneath by the very creature everyone else called a nuisance. One field, two harvests, one body of water doing two jobs. It was not a trick. It was a cycle, and cycles look like madness to people who only know straight lines. The first thing Clara bought was not a truck. It was an old diesel pump from a cousin of a cousin in Abbeville, a machine that coughed black smoke and shook so hard the bolts seemed offended. She bought patched pipe, a rusted gate valve, and a spool of wire for traps she did not yet own. Then she went to the co-op for seed. The manager, Harold LeBlanc, listened to her from behind a desk polished by 20 years of men asking for credit. He had known her father. He had known her husband. He had known her as a girl buying flour with her mother. That history made his refusal sound softer, but not kinder. "You're asking for seed rice on land that never proved rice," he said. "I'm asking for enough to plant the first basin, and after that comes crawfish." He stared at her, not angry. Worse again, concerned. "Clara," he said, "rice is hard enough when the soil is right. You want to flood bad ground, throw in crawfish, and call that a farm." He opened a drawer, then closed it without taking anything out. "I can't put the co-op behind an experiment like that. Not with your situation." Your situation. Those two words carried the whole parish inside them. Divorced. Young. Female. Cash. Poor. Alone. Clara thanked him and left before her face could betray her. The bank refused her 3 days later. No collateral worth counting, no production history, no husband signing alongside her. So she sold the last valuable thing she owned, her grandfather's flatbed. It had cedar shavings in the cracks of the seat, and one dent in the fender from a gatepost. He always denied hitting. Selling it felt like cutting a root, but the money bought seed rice, fuel, and 3 sacks of brewed crawfish, from a trapper who laughed when he asked where she planned to put them. "In a field," she said. He grinned. "Then I hope the field has better sense than people." For 6 weeks, Clara worked where everyone could see her. She shoveled clay onto the low banks until her shoulders burned. She patched crawfish holes before she had crawfish. She laid pipe from the bayou ditch to the first basin. She rebuilt an old sluice board from scrap lumber. Every evening, trucks slowed on the parish road. The drivers saw a woman in a straw hat, mud up to her knees, wrestling with a pump older than she was. Some lifted one hand in pity. Some did not lift a hand at all. When the pump finally caught, it sounded like a sick animal waking up. Water coughed through the pipe, brown at first, then cleaner. It ran into the lowest basin and spread across the cracked floor, finding every old depression, every remembered path. The plates of clay darkened. The cracks swallowed the first water greedily. For 2 days, it seemed the field was drinking faster than she could fill it. People noticed. At the co-op, someone said she was trying to drown a desert. At the store, someone said she would turn the place into mosquito heaven. Clara heard all of it. She kept the pump running. When the water finally held at 3 inches, she waded into the basin with a sack of rice seed against her hip. There was no machine, no hired crew, no clean efficiency. She broadcast by hand, swinging her arm in a steady arc, the seeds scattering over the water like small promises. That first crop did not impress anyone. By August, the rice stood thin in places and uneven in others. Weeds broke. A storm pushed water over one bank and left a ragged scar where the clay gave way. Her harvest was small enough that 2 neighbors pretended not to see her hauling sacks, because watching would have been too embarrassing. But the rice was not the whole crop. It was only the first voice in the duet. After harvest, Clara cut what she could, left the stubble standing, and flooded the basin again. She seeded the crawfish into the water and set the wire trap she had built at night on her kitchen floor. Through the fall, she checked water depth, watched the weather, and tried not to count money she did not have. Winter came gray and wet. The cane fields around her lay bare. The soybean stubble on neighboring land turned dull and brittle, but Clara's first basin held a quiet sheet of water, broken by the white tips of trap floats. On a January morning, with fog sitting low over the field, she pushed a flat-bottomed pirogue into the water. The boat scraped over submerged stubble. Her hands were stiff from the cold. The first trap came up almost empty. 3 crawfish and a clump of black leaves. The second trap had 2. The third had none. A silence fell over the field so complete that Clara could hear water dripping from the wire mesh. For 1 hard minute, every voice in the parish entered her head. Land like this buries farmers. You want to flood bad ground and call that a farm, poor Clara. She sat in the pirogue with the empty trap across her knees and felt the old fear rise, not loud, but deep. The fear that maybe wisdom was only stubbornness with a prettier name. The fear that she had sold her grandfather's truck to prove everyone right. Then she remembered another line from the notebooks. The first answer from land is usually a whisper. A foolish farmer quits before the whisper finishes. Clara reached for the fourth trap. It resisted. At first she thought it had snagged on stubble. She leaned back and pulled harder. The trap broke the surface, heavy, dripping, alive. Inside was a writhing mass of red-brown crawfish. Claws clicking against wire, tails snapping, bodies packed so tight, they shifted like a single creature. Clara did not shout. She could not. She sat there in the fog with water running down her sleeves and laughed once. Quietly, the way a person laughs when the world has not changed for anyone else, but has changed completely for them. By the end of that winter, she had harvested just over 600 pounds from 8 flooded acres. It was not wealth, it was proof. The rice paid a little. The crawfish paid a little more together. They paid the taxes, the fuel bill, and the next season's seed. More important, they bought her time. Year 2 was better. Year 3 brought the second basin into the system. By year 5, Clara had stopped explaining herself. The land was doing the explaining. The the grey hardness softened into darker soil along the basin floors. Rice roots began to hold. The crawfish, burrowing and feeding, worked the field from below, in a way no plough had managed. The stubble that other farmers burned became winter feed. The water that had once made the property worthless became the engine of the whole place. Her costs stayed almost embarrassingly low. Seed, fuel, trap wire, repairs. No new tractor loan, no large fertilizer bill, no desperate chemical bill after every problem. She was not richer than the big farmers, not at first, but she was freer than many of them. When rice prices dipped, crawfish carried her. When crawfish prices softened, rice steadied the books. The two crops did not remove risk, but they made risk less able to corner her. The parish noticed slowly, then all at once. A restaurant buyer from Lafayette came after tasting 1 sack of her crawfish and asked if she could supply him every week through the season. He said they were clean, firm, and bigger than most he saw from open marsh traps. Clara knew why. They were feeding in a controlled field. In water she watched. On rice stubble she had grown herself. By the late 1980s, men who had once slowed their trucks to pity her now slowed them to count trap floats. Someone claimed she was lucky. Someone else claimed the Duhon place must not have been so bad after all. That is how communities protect themselves from being wrong. First, they mock the thing. Then, they call it luck. Then they say it was obvious. In 1991, Harold LeBlanc came down Clara's gravel drive in a clean sedan that looked nervous among the ruts. The house she had built was small, plain, and fully paid for. The shed beside it held traps, pipe, seed sacks, and a pump she could repair by sound. Harold stepped out carefully, trying to avoid the mud with shoes that had no business being there. Clara met him at the edge of the yard. She was 41 by then. The sun had browned her arms. Her hands had the thickened joints of someone who had earned every acre twice. Harold looked past her toward the fields. The spring rice was bright green, growing through shallow water that mirrored the sky. Frogs called from the ditches. Egrets moved along the far edge like folded white paper. What had once looked abandoned now looked alive in layers. I was going over accounts, Harold said. Clara waited. I see what you buy every year. Seed, fuel, some supplies. Not much else. He turned his hat in both hands, and I see what comes in. He looked embarrassed by the numbers, as if arithmetic itself had testified against him. Your return per acre is higher than farms 10 times your size. Still Clara said nothing. Harold cleared his throat. I told you this wouldn't work. You did. I called it an experiment. You did. I was wrong. The words came out small, but they landed with the weight of 17 years. Then he said, if you ever need credit from the co-op, you will have it. Clara looked at the water moving gently through the rice. For a moment, she thought of the truck she had sold, the rented room, the fog, the 4th trap coming up heavy, her grandfather's handwriting under the yellow light. Then she smiled. Thank you, Harold, but I built this place so I wouldn't have to ask twice. He nodded, because there was no answer better than that. Clara never became the largest farmer in the parish. That had never been the dream. She bought more low ground when she could. Always land others had dismissed. Always with cash from the system itself. 62 acres became 90. 90 became 130. Every expansion followed the same rule. The land had to be shaped for water, and the water had to serve more than one purpose. Eventually, younger farmers began visiting her place. Some came pretending they were only passing by. Some came with notebooks. A few brought their sons and daughters, and stood at the edge of the basins, while Clara explained water depth, stubble timing, trap spacing, and the difference between forcing a field and arranging with it. She never made it sound mystical. That may have been her greatest gift. She did not tell them the land would reward good intentions. She told them the land would respond to design. Flood too deep, and the rice suffered. Drain too early, and the crawfish never gained. Burn the stubble, and you burned the winter feed. Treat the field like 2 separate businesses, and you missed the profit hiding between them. The secret was not water. The secret was sequence. Rice first, stubble second, crawfish third. Soil renewed. Then rice again. A circle can look small from far away, but if you stand inside it long enough, it becomes a world. Years later, on a warm evening after a spring rain, Clara sat on her porch with her granddaughter beside her. Between them lay the wooden box of notebooks. The same box that had followed her out of a broken marriage and into a field no one wanted. The girl traced one old page with careful fingers. Is this where it started? She asked. Clara looked toward the basins. The water had taken the sunset and broken it into copper pieces. Trap floats dotted the far field. Young rice moved in the breeze. No, Clara said. She tapped the page, then the porch, then the land beyond it. This is where I learned how to see it. The men at the co-op had seen worthless clay. The banker had seen no collateral. The seller had seen escape. The neighbors had seen a woman about to disappear into a bad decision. But the field had been saying the same thing all along. I am not empty. I am waiting. And Clara Robichaux, with no tractor, no credit, and almost no one on her side, became the first person patient enough to answer.